Hello and welcome back to Talk Too Much Sports. Despite the fact that I've got my Circling Seattle Sports background here, I don't have a background for this yet. Welcome to the broadcast interview series number 3. I have Madelyn Burke with me, Arizona State University graduate experience with. This is a list that I was kind of like, whoa. Okay, let's just go down it. Phoenix Suns, ESPN, Fox Sports, USCFootball.com, Comcast Sportsnet, Time Warner Cable, Los Angeles Clippers, Fanduel, Bleacher Report, Sports Illustrated, and the New York Football Giants. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I mean, I feel like when I hear you read my resume, I'm like, damn, I've done a lot of things.
I went through it fully just, to make sure I had all my research. I was like, okay, it's a good amount of stuff going on here. So let's just get into it. Did you go into Arizona State knowing that you wanted to go into journalism, or was that something that you found out throughout the course of college?
I knew I wanted to go into journalism, which is why I pursued ASU. They have the Walter Cronkite School there. And before he passed, he would come and speak to the school every semester. And so I got an opportunity to just be in a room with one of the greatest broadcasters to ever do it a handful of times. And that was just an incredible experience. But yeah, so I knew I wanted to do journalism. I always kind of gravitated towards writing. I didn't know what that looked like when I was applying to college, but I knew that, okay, this is something that I'm going to kind of go towards that path. And it wasn't until I was in college and, a couple internship opportunities and some kind of reality checks. I was like, oh, you know what? I can make a career in sports journalism. And, a lot of it started because I worked as a runner and a PA for a Monday Night Football game, the Bears Cardinals game where Denny Green lost it at the podium. You want to crown him and all that. And I was, running errands and doing production assistant things. And I was like, this is amazing. I want to do this all the time. And so, yeah.
With that being said about Arizona State, how do you remember your time with running with the pack when it was the Pac-10 back then?
It was the Pac-10 back then. And like, I remember when I was in college, I had tunnel vision. Like I knew I wanted to do sports broadcasting. I didn't want to just be a local news anchor. But at the time, I graduated from ASU in 2009. And at that time, the mindset was still, you got to go to market 182 and then to market 115 and maybe make a jump to market 40 or whatever. And that just wasn't me. So I always kind of gravitated towards sports stories, and my teachers would be like, you're not going to get a job in LA hosting a sports show first thing out of college. And then it was almost like the universe was like, or will you? Because it just was happening. It was a combination of preparation and luck. I was in the right place at the right time. I met the right people who gave me an opportunity and I made the most out of it. And it was a great show. I mean, we went to every school in the then Pac-10 and interviewed football head coach, a football player. We did a women's sports feature. We would do a, walk around campus kind of man on the street trivia game. There was a lot of fun elements of that show, and it was really great. And it was a nationally broadcast television show, which is a huge opportunity for my very first job. And I'm like, still to this day, realize how rare that is and how grateful I am for that. And, of course, just as this business goes, there's a lot of ups and downs. When that show ended, it wasn't like, all right, next step, higher level. I had to kind of work my way in and out of relevance for a while. And, but I had a blast doing that show and I learned a lot.
So with that being said, was there a sport that you knew you wanted to cover? Obviously, right now you're with the Giants, and we'll get to the Clippers here in a second. But was there anything that you were aiming for? Or was it just you wanted to work in this field?
I think basketball was always the one that I was I'm 5'10", but I'm a waist to height. I have no vertical and my handles are embarrassing. So I never played, but I always loved watching basketball. And even when I was doing running with the pack, if we were, in Oregon and we had some downtime, I'd make a point to reach out to the Portland Trailblazers and say, hey, can I take your PR rep out for a cup of coffee? I just want to kind of get to know the people around the league so that if ever I did have an opportunity, it wasn't like, who's this random person? It was more of like, okay, I've met her, like, this is how you build these relationships. And when I met with Raymond Ritter with the Golden State Warriors, I remember, kind of conceptualizing, like I can shoot, I can edit, I can produce, I can do a final product. And he was like, I don't know if we're ready for something like that, but you should talk to Joe Safety at the Clippers. He would love that. So I did. And he did love that. And he was like, let's find a way to use you. And I turned a pitch into a full-time job, traveling with the team on the charter. And I did that for quite some time, for 4 years.
So that's a perfect segue actually to what I was going to speak about. What things had to happen to make that, that pitch into that full-time job, as you said, traveling with the team all over basically through regular season, preseason, playoffs? What needed to take place for it to grow into that?
Oh gosh, so many things. Everything had to align. But it was interesting when I met with Joe Safety the first time, and I said to him, here's what I can offer. And he's like, I like your work and I wish there was a way I could use you. And I said, well, why don't we just put it on the website? And this is, again, back in 2009, 2010, not every website had a team reporter like they do now. So I was like, you know what, this would be a great platform for it. I can give you like everything you need. And all it just has to do is be published. And so he's like, okay, here's my budget. How far will that get me? And if I was being fiscally responsible, I would have said a week because it was a very, very low budget. But I was like, you know what? I can do a month. Give me a month, and that can be my salary for a month. And I pinched all the pennies. I was living at home. I was like, okay, how do I make myself a mainstay here? And I would come in every day. I was at every practice. I was at every shoot around, every game. I'd produce, interviews and features. And after a month of just kind of making so much content and making myself like almost like a part of what people see when they come into the office every day, it was like, okay, you know what? He finally sat me down. He's like, all right, let's do one more month, the same terms. And I was like, okay. And so I ended up doing a whole season, month to month, on a very embarrassingly low salary that I am surprised I survived on, because I wanted to prove my worth. And I wanted to say, here, listen, this experience and this opportunity to cover an NBA team and have the access I do, that's the value. And the money, that's going to come later in my career. When you're first starting in your career, you can't be focused on the paycheck. And I was fortunate that I had a situation that I, could afford to do that and had help with, friends and family members and stuff, so I could stay afloat. And not a lot of people, I recognize, not a lot of people have that opportunity. But I did, and I made the most of it. And I kind of made myself a mainstay in that, organization, to the point where they're like, you know what, let's keep doing this and let's make it official. And they turned it into a full-time job. And I would travel with the team to every game. We went to China for the NBA China games, which was one of the most memorable experiences. I never would have planned a trip because it just felt like such a big deal. And then we get there and it was just an incredible experience to watch how the game is received overseas and all that. And so it was really cool. And it was really cool to watch something that I had conceptualized and idealized and made it real, and was able to build into something valuable. That was a nice accomplishment, I guess.
So taking that into consideration, do you miss, being with the team in that regard? Or is it just kind of like that was a step along the way to, where you are now? Or do you miss working with basketball? Because it feels like in a lot of ways, the NBA does a really good job of being progressive on things and just overall good as a league. And I say that while I wear my Supersonics hoodie. So I hope that we can be a part of that again.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It feels like the league does a lot of good things in regards to what they're doing with their players, and as a whole. So I guess my question is, do you miss working with that at all? Or is that something where it's like, hey, I'm really glad that I had that experience?
I think a little bit of both. I think it was a wonderful time in my life. It was one of the most memorable, experiences ever. But at some point, you kind of have to take the next step. You have to grow. And when I was in that job, I would walk into the gym looking like a pack mule. I had my tripod and my camera and my laptop and And I was one man banding it all. And, actually after some time, they decided, they wanted to change directions. And that was a big blow to me because I built like I felt like I built this thing and they're saying, yeah, we don't want to use you for it anymore. And
Oh,
that's hard. And that happens in this business. And I think not a lot of people talk about, oh, they'll say, oh yeah, when I left there, and you leave a job, but like sometimes it's because they just objectively decided they want to go another direction. And so that's hard because you build your identity a little bit around a job when you're involved in it so much. But after that happened, I got, other opportunities. I got an opportunity to work with Fanduel, which is what ended up moving me to the East Coast. And then probably about 3-4 months after I moved to the East Coast to New York, signed a year lease. And then all of a sudden my boss calls and says, hey, the attorney general says this might be gambling. So we're going to just end your contract now. And thanks for stopping by. And I was
oh,
like,
geez.
oh, I just moved to the most expensive city in the world. And now I don't have a job. But, that's the thing. That's what you learn also through the years of doing this, is that you got to rely on your own talent and trust your own ability. And, along the way, I met Don Sperling, who's now my boss with the Giants and who has been an incredible, valuable person in my career, because not only has he been realistic with putting me in a position to succeed, but he's also given me areas in which are opportunities to grow every season. I'm entering my 6th season with the Giants now, and every season I've had a little bit more responsibility. And I feel like he has really kind of taken my career and said, I see the raw talent, I see the ability here, but let's sharpen that, let's hone that, because I want to make sure that you are the best you can be. And so he's been a super valuable person for me.
It's always really cool. I spoke with Abby Chin first with the Boston Celtics and then Kevin Burkhardt last week. It's always really cool to see how people get to places. Obviously, certain things aren't fun to hear about, how, they're like, oh, yeah, well, we're going to take this without you. That kind of sucks to hear about. And then obviously with Fanduel, which I will speak on here in a second, but it's really cool to see, what people made that difference, like you said, and who takes those chances on people. Now,
Mhm.
I want to reroute back to the Clippers just for a second, and then we're going to move back to New York here. Uh, what do you think the Clippers need to do to make it out of the West? There's a lot of moving pieces going on in the West, which there always seems to be, at least in recent times. But do you think there's anything that really needs to happen for the Clippers to set themselves apart and end up as the West representative in this year's finals?
I mean, I have them picked as the West representative in this year's finals. And I think a lot of that is because what we saw from this team last year is the amount of talent that they had, but they collapsed on themselves almost, and they kind of caved in on themselves in that series against Denver. I really think that the trade deadline, when that Rondo trade was made, I was like, that is what they needed to do. Lou Williams is a sentimental piece. I think Clippers fans are going to miss him, and he was a great 6th man, but we saw he was kind of struggling to live up to the expectation performance wise on the court quite a bit. And Rajon Rondo is the type of guy who is not going to give you a Russell Westbrook triple double every night, but he is that voice in the locker room that you respect, that is going to call you out if you're letting a 3-1 series lead slip away. And he's also going to draw some attention away from Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Also, I hope Paul George's confidence continues, because it seems like he's playing like himself. He's playing a little bit freer lately and a little bit more comfortable. That needs to continue into the postseason when the lights are brighter, when he's on that stage, because we've seen him have the proclivity to kind of crumble under that pressure. But I do think the addition of Rondo, who provides that distraction for the defense, but also that voice in the locker room and that presence and that focus, is really what was necessary to get this team over the hump.
And it was interesting. I don't know what show it was, but they were talking about how playoff Rondo becomes a thing and how it just turns on. And to your point, that is such a big thing that I hadn't personally think about, just because I'm not a Clippers fan. So maybe I wouldn't think about it, but just to have that attention brought to someone else, that's a good point. I'm very interested to see now how that goes. And just as we
Yeah.
get to playoffs here, which
Well,
is
and we
pretty
all have
close.
we all have those moments where we want, where we need to hear something, but you need to hear it from the right person. It's like if your mother tells you something, you're going to be like, okay, mom. But if your best friend tells you the exact same thing, it's going to hit a little bit different. Or if somebody you really respect and admire tells you the exact same thing, you're going to take it a little bit differently. So I think, that is important too, to remember in terms of having those voices in the locker room. And people talk about the value of that, but that's why it's valuable.
Hmm. Um, Yeah, no. So now I might have to pay a little more attention to that as we get toward playoff time here. But back to New York. So, I mean, you spoke about FanDuel, and I actually don't have that here till a little bit later. But what opens the door to Sports Illustrated? How does that come into play for you?
Yeah, so when I was at FanDuel, one of the NFL guys that I worked with, Aaron Nagler, who covers the Green Bay Packers, he's tremendously good at his job and lives and breathes Green Bay Packers. So he and I worked together at FanDuel, and when that shuttered, essentially, because this was 2015-16, when daily fantasy, every time you turn on the TV, it was like FanDuel, DraftKings, promo code, lamp, I don't know, it was all over the place. And then the attorney general was like, this could be gambling, so we're going to shut it down. And now, obviously, now it's built back up. But at the time, we all were kind of in a place of like, what do we do now? And Aaron had done some work with Sports Illustrated and said to me, you have to reach out to these people. Like you would be perfect for what they do there. So I did. I set up a coffee with Alex Hampel, who is still, was then and is still the head of video. And, this was February, and there just wasn't an opportunity at the time, but I stayed on his radar and I just checked in with him pretty regularly. And then it wasn't until about August, which it was the same week that I got the job with the Giants, that I got the job with Sports Illustrated. So I was like, yes, I will do both. And like, that's what you do in this business. You find the time, you make the time, because it is such a fickle industry and you want to be able to create as many opportunities as you can. So that late summer, they had somebody, a woman who was working there, who got married and left in an opening. And because I had stayed, not just reached out and said, here's who I am, here's what I have to offer, but I had stayed in touch, and I had every once in a while checked in, not in like an obnoxious way, but in an organic way. Like, hey, I saw this piece that you guys did. That was really great. Hey, just checking in to see if there's anything I can offer. Here's an idea that I have, or what have you. And because I was so fresh in his mind, he's like, you know what? This would just make my life easier. Because you forget too, like when people are hiring for a job, they want it to be easy. They want it to be like, oh, I have somebody. I don't have to go through this whole process of interviewing a million people. And so for me being like fresh in his mind and him saying, you know what? This makes it easy. She's leaving. You could come on in. Boom, done. And the rest is history.
It's also interesting as I kind of talked about, people's journeys. The general idea of getting the foot in the door is always something that, continues to ring true. And it's something I've tried to do with different things, mostly on this show. But it's interesting to see how that works and how that can be applied. You spoke about opportunities. What was your time with Bleacher Report like? Because to be quite honest, I hadn't heard about Bleacher Report until, recent years. And then all of a sudden it's kind of one of the bigger media outlets. What was your time like with them?
It's interesting because they came on the scene around the same time as like Barstool, like years ago, but then they received a lot of funding from Turner and elevated them to a bigger platform. A friend of mine was in the talent office at Bleacher Report at the time that I had lost my job with FanDuel because of, legalities, because is this gambling? And so he said, listen, we want to find some time for you to just like get a couple days doing fill-in stuff. Like you wanted to just help me out and give me some freelance work. I said, great. So I did that. At the time it was Team Stream, which was just kind of little videos in the mobile app and the website and all that kind of stuff. And I still do work with Bleacher Report. I still do some social stuff with them. I still do recently, last year, I went out to the Indy 500 with Reggie Wayne, and he and I competed in who could change a tire on a NASCAR car faster, and like just random stuff like that. And so we, it's still a good relationship there. And BR has, the people that I've worked with there have always been wonderful. And that's kind of the life of a freelancer too. I mean, I do have roles that I have kind of embedded myself in and become more part of my identity as a broadcaster, but I am still a freelancer. So I'll still say, oh yeah, you know what, let me do this here and let me do that there, and fill the gaps that way.
Yeah, no, it's I gotta find out if you beat Reggie Wayne or not. Damn. Okay, I'll find
You
out
can
that.
watch
I'll find
the
that out.
video. Also, we
Um.
did 2 takes, one in which he beat me and one in which I beat him. But then the
Wow.
final edit of the video, they gave me the win. And I was like, oh, thank you.
Huh. Interesting, I guess, to hear
Yeah.
how that works. But yeah, it's been interesting to me because I mean, at least in my regards, growing up as I am, Bleacher Report has been one of the more prominent, sports media things. So
Mhm.
it's interesting to see how that works and the work that they do. And I didn't know that they were related with Turner. So I learned something today.
Yeah, their
Um,
own. That's why when you watch NBA on TNT, they're always plugging Bleacher and House of Highlights because it's all the same family.
and when they show, Clippers and Celtics is a close game watch on TNT, that makes a lot more sense now.
There
There
you
we
go.
go.
There you go.
Um, so taking things all into consideration, if we're looking at the broad scale of your career here, would you have done anything different along the way if you could, or were you happy with the journey and how it's led you to where you are?
I think that there are moments that I look back and that I think, wow, I was really young at that point in my career and I probably could have handled that differently or probably could have made a better decision there. But it's kind of like the butterfly effect. Had I changed that, where would I be? Had I done that differently, what would I be doing now? And I'm just so grateful for all of the opportunities and experiences that I've had in my career. I mean, I've been in this industry for going on 11, 12 years now. And I'm just super grateful for the path that I've had. And I think every mistake that I've made, I've learned from. And that's the only thing I could say. I think that we all make mistakes and we all do things that we're like, ooh, yeah, I probably should have handled that better. Probably should have not said that then or what have you. But as long as you learn from it, there's just no regret.
Yeah, it's interesting just to say, well, and even speaking with some athletes from around the area, because that's how I got my start doing these interviews. And then speaking with you and the other people I've spoken with on this, it's always interesting to say, hey, I might have done this different, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't have learned from it. And it's good to know, I guess, that while you may screw up, it's just kind of how you rebound from that in a way, not to play on basketball terms.
Absolutely. Well, and also too, I mean, people like, you'll look at my career and you'll list off all the places that I've worked and think like, wow, that's a lot of places. But it's also because sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I outgrow the role. Sometimes the role outgrows me, or it is a subjective business. Sometimes they say, yeah, we don't want you anymore. We want somebody else. And you have to kind of roll with that and be okay with that. And I think anybody that is getting into this industry, the one thing I will say is like, you just have to accept that it's going to be hard and you're going to have a lot of no's. You're going to have a lot of kind of heartbreak over, oh, I really wanted that job. And somebody who I feel like I'm better at the job than they are, they got it and I didn't. And I don't understand why. And you know what? Life is long and you just gotta kind of keep your head down and keep doing your work and yourself the best and most authentically as you can, and it works out.
So it's interesting that we talk about that because this is where I want to stop off at our friends at Fanduel. Obviously, we take that into account, what happened there and how that might be gambling. We don't want to be associated with that. And it's interesting to see how that played out to now, because my question is, would you have been able to predict or see how big FanDuel would get at this current point in time? I know that we can't really do that here in Washington State at the moment, but back then when that happened, that happens back in 2015, if I'm correct. I could be wrong.
Hmm. Yeah.
Would you be able to, predict how big that would get? Because now it seems like more and more across the country, this is being accepted and this is being put into play. And I figure it's only a matter of time for some states. But would you have been able to predict how big this would get? Or it's like, oh, I don't know if you guys are going to last much longer.
I don't think you can ever really genuinely predict it, right? That's like saying, "Oh, I knew that they were going to come back and win that series, or I knew that they were going to win that game, or I knew that that shot was going in." Nobody really ever knows. But you got to take a chance, and I think that's why I did with FanDuel when that came up and when that was presented to me, because it felt like something that I saw had the possibility and had the opportunity to be what it is and what it is growing into. And so that's why, sometimes you hit it on the nose and sometimes you don't. And there's no real rhyme or reason between what succeeds and what doesn't. You can have two equally quality products. And it's just like that Malcolm Gladwell book, The Tipping Point, one just hits that point where suddenly it just everyone's aware and everyone's like, oh, you know what? I like that. And there's not really a lot of common sense behind it. It's just a combination of luck and timing and everything else. And so I think, long story long, you can't really predict what's going to take off, but if you do good work and if you see things that you're like, okay, you know what, this has potential and you believe in it, then it has a chance.
So as we Fanduel behind finally, a bunch of tie-ins there with Fanduel. Get into the Giants. I have a couple things for you, a couple different player-related things, and then just kind of look out on the season just because we are recording this on the day of the schedule release.
Mm-hmm.
A favorite all-time New York Giant to interview? If you had to pick one. If I had to make you pick one out of, I know because it's always tough to just pick one, but if you had to, would you be able to?
No.
You have a few names that stick out to you when you think about that?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of guys that are just a blast to work with. I mean, Victor Cruz and I have now become co-hosts in some regard, and so that's been a blast. Eli Manning, especially now in his retirement, has let his personality shine through publicly a little bit more, so that's been a lot of fun. Dexter Lawrence, that man gave himself the nickname Sexy Dexy, so I feel like that needs to be appreciated. He's just got so much character and personality. And then you got some of the older guys, David Deal, Howard Cross, Michael Strahan, Carl Banks. Carl Banks is just one of my favorite humans that I work with. And then some of the guys that are on this team now that have a lot of personality and they have a lot of fun with it. I think it's just interesting. There's so many good people around the organization, and that's one of the things that the Giants do very well is they draft and sign free agents who are just quality humans, and it just makes going to work a lot more fun because you're like, you know what, I respect you, I enjoy this back and forth, I enjoy spending my time talking to you and getting to know you and rooting for you to do well so that I can continue to work in the postseason. So
yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Eli because it has been something that I'll notice here and there. What he posts on Twitter, he makes some interesting comments on there, or he makes some interesting posts on there. I'm like, okay, all right, Eli, I wouldn't have expected this from you, but hey, I won't complain about this content.
That's the thing. It's like people who know him are like, this is you, who you really are. He's just like a kind of sarcastic, dry, funny guy, but he never showed that to the media when he was playing because I think, he understood New York media and all that. And he just didn't want anything to be taken out of context. So he just kept it super buttoned up. And now that he's retired, he's like, let me tell you.
Transitioning from a former quarterback to current quarterback, how much of a big deal is this year for Daniel Jones, would you say, considering, and obviously the past few seasons, as well as just the different weapons that have been added, as well as the return of Saquon Barkley, which I will address here in a second. But is this a big deal in your eyes, do you think, or is that being a little bit fluffed up by certain members of media or just the people in general?
I think it's fair. I think, even the coaching staff and the GM and the owners have acknowledged that this is a big year for Daniel Jones because, going from year one to year two, not only is it an entirely new coaching staff and a new system, but also a global pandemic that kind of affected that a little bit. And then there have been so many injuries. Daniel Jones hasn't been healthy for an entire season yet in his career. That being said, though, going into year three, there's some continuity with this coaching staff. I think that this staff is committed to putting him in the best position to succeed, as we saw from the offseason moves. And I think having these weapons around him is going to be valuable. I mean, last year, they didn't have a clear wide receiver one. Sterling Shepard is a slot guy, but he was kind of the wide receiver one. Darius Slayton, he's a speed guy, and he could beat you on the matchup. But, if he's getting all the coverage, it's just not. He was a second year guy. So I think that the third year, and also you look at Josh Allen, for example, and the way that when the Bills brought in Stephon Diggs, his game elevated because it's not just about, how much time are you giving the quarterback to protect, but it's also, where's he going to throw it? Where is he going to get, who's he going to trust to complete the play. And when your mind is moving that fast, when you're reading your coverage or reading your receivers, and you're reading the defense, and all this is happening in 2.5 seconds, there needs to be some level of trust, and having these weapons on the offensive end that have proven they're trustable, or they can be trusted in that regard, I think is going to be very valuable for Daniel Jones.
So with that being said about Daniel Jones, what do you think about big year for Saquon Barkley? Because I don't know, I've always liked Saquon, even though he beat my Huskies in the Fiesta Bowl a few years ago at Penn State. That was hard to watch him beat us like that. But I don't know, I've always really liked Saquon and his ability. And obviously the first year was great, but then last year happens, and I don't know. I've seen people say, oh, Saquon can't stay healthy. Why would you waste a pick this high? I think it's a little ridiculous just because of the athlete that he is. But do you think there's any pressure on Saquon this year to have a big bounce back year in a way?
I think if anybody's putting pressure on Saquon, it's going to be Saquon, because that man is somebody who is not just in love with the idea of being great, but he's also in love with the process. And he puts in so much work in his game, in his body, in staying in shape. He prioritizes the right things. And when he got hurt, I don't think there was anybody more upset about it than him. I mean, he was pushing and trying to get back because he wants to be on the field to help his team. But when he's not, when he's on the sideline, he is the loudest cheerleader in the room. And that's somebody, like, just as a person, as a human, that's something really valuable to have. But I do think that, he's been working hard. He's been getting his body right in this offseason. And I think, he's expected to be ready to get on the field for the start of the year. And it's going to be a big year for him in terms of just kind of proving to himself, I guess, because football fans know what he can do. But again, a running back takes a lot of heat, a lot of contact. The weapons that they've added in this offense, though, is definitely going to help that, because the defense can't just key in on stopping Saquon and letting the rest happen, which you saw that Steelers game week 1 last year, week 1 or 2 last year, where like they just said, all right, well, we're just going to stop Saquon, and then that's all that we're going to try. And then it worked out for them. So I think having more weapons is going to help open things up for him. And I think that, he's very determined to get back and be at his peak performance.
I think you definitely spoke on a key piece. You don't want to let an offense be one-dimensional at all, especially with, a guy like that. And like you said, with a running back getting as much heat as they do, with being one-dimensional, you don't want him to get hit as much like that. So
right.
Key piece, and I am excited to see him this year. So with that being said, and I know you mentioned the draft, what things, if any, do you think that the Giants need to do prior to preseason and getting, kind of back in the building to become, a division winner for this year in your eyes? Because obviously, the Eagles drafted Devonta Smith, which should help Jalen Hurts if Jalen Hurts becomes the quarterback, because I know there's controversy in that building. Dallas gets Dak Prescott back and adds some defense on that end. Washington had a solid defense, and who did Washington draft? Oh no, I'm blanking. But Washington has a solid defense, and I think they'll be good, here in the future. But with that being said, do you think there's anything that sticks out to you that the Giants need to, tune up before we start to get people back in the building and get ready for the season to start?
I mean, it's hard to really tune anything up before you're in pads, right? I mean, they've made the offseason signings, they made the free agency signings, they drafted the way that they did, which I think was a great draft for this team. They addressed a lot of needs, but also got some very talented players, and some, I think, even some steals. But I think this division as a whole, the way we saw it last year, the way we saw it play out, it was like nobody wanted to win the NFC East. It was hot potato. Look, no, you got it. No, you got it. No, you got it. And now all of these teams, like you mentioned, are kind of rebounding and building from that point. And, for the Giants, it's going to be interesting. There's things that I'll have my eye on in training camp when that does come around, because, OTAs and mini camp, you can't really make too much out of that. It's more of just like, all right, we're still here. We're still building some chemistry, and high five, go team. But training camp is when you can really see the product that this team is going to start putting on the field. And I'm going to be interested to see how this defense looks without Dalvin Tomlinson. You know, Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence still shoring up that front, but losing Dalvin Tomlinson in free agency, him signing with the Vikings, is going to be, okay, who's going to play that role? I mean, that man was the team captain. I'm interested to see this offensive line. They seem to really believe in nurturing and growing the young guys that they've acquired over the past few years. Can this year be the year that this line finally feels like a solid unit? I mean, Nate Solder is going to be coming back. He took a gap year last year from COVID. How much did that affect him, especially an older lineman? So there's a lot of questions that I'm more just anticipating seeing how they look when there's the pads on.
And, I guess that's something that we'll see with a bunch of guys, like you said, that come back from having that gap year. So I think the draft gives us a little hope that season's closer than it is, but now we have to wait a little bit longer. But definitely really cool to stop and talk football and just have this whole talk with you. Is there anything that you want to put out there? Usually when I do this, I put socials in the description anyway, but if is there anything that you want to put out there or make known, be my guest.
I don't have a mixtape dropping anytime soon, unfortunately. But Kadarius Toney does. So young Joker. He's got a side career in music, so that's fun. But no, I think it's just, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. And I think anybody who is looking to pursue a career in this industry, I think the key is to be patient with yourself and with the process, because you're going to look at a lot of people and say, oh, wow, he's so young, she's so young, how are they there? But everybody's journey is different, and you got to go through a lot of experiences, and you got to learn a lot, and you got to kind of work your way there in your own timing. So be patient with it and just do good work and trust it'll all work out.
I appreciate having you on and, taking time out of your day. I know I don't want to rush you out of here, but I appreciate having you on, and thank you. And I guess excited to see how the season ends up looking, just because I think that's later in the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you.